So I'm joined today by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who has been speaking out extensively regarding the DOJ's handling of the Epstein files and the possible connections that Jeffrey Epstein might have to very powerful people in our government. So, Senator Whitehouse, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
So, tell me a little bit about why you think Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein had an outstanding relationship and what that would have to do with Russia.
Well, we know that they had a long-standing relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Trump himself has called Jeffrey Epstein his best friend.
Right.
And they're seen in innumerable social events together. So that much is pretty established.
Right.
What I think people had not noticed was that Epstein also had a set of relationships with Russia. The girls he recruited were often Russian. Transactions he did were often into Russian accounts. Contacts he had were often with Russian operatives, including graduates of their FSB intelligence academy. The Maxwell family had its own history as Russian agents, you might say, or operatives financed by Russia. So you look at all that Russia piece, and then you look at Trump Russia, and the purpose of my speech was to say there's not just Trump-Epstein over here and Trump Russia over here. It's logically a three-way connection, Trump Russia Epstein, and that needs to be explored further.
And what are your hopes, long term, as you speak out about this? Do you think the Supreme Court does anything? Do you think the DOJ handles it a little differently?
I think further investigation is important. A lot of that is being done by news outlets. A lot of that is being done by people who are investigating on their own. So there's a lot more work to do. We still don't have the notes of the FBI agents. We have their 302s now, but we don't have the investigative notes that they took. And there's a whole arena of investigation with respect to the financial transactions that has not been followed up on. And it's really kind of preposterous for the Trump DOJ to claim that it has done anything like a responsible job here, because the activity reports are called suspicious activity reports.
Right.
And they involve Jeffrey Epstein. So when they're called suspicious activity reports, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to think that there might be some suspicious activity there you should investigate, and they have done nothing.
So taking that into consideration, I'm wondering what your reaction was today, when the current Attorney General spoke out and said, "I will not release even one more Epstein file." Are there any thoughts that gives you?
Yeah, I think it means that the rest of the country, the investigative apparatus of our news services, the people who investigate this and put information up on the internet, need to keep digging and doing their jobs. If he doesn't want to investigate the suspicious activity reports involving Epstein and Russian banks and accounts, then we'll just have to continue digging around them. But clearly, Blanche is Donald Trump's defense lawyer. Donald Trump has an interest in this investigation because his name comes up so frequently. And when the Department of Justice is being run by a person who continues to believe that his duty is to be the defense lawyer for Donald Trump, rather than to the public to get a full, honest accounting of what took place, we're going to continue to have a problem.
Right. As you know, 3.5 million files were released, and what was glaring to the public was all of those redactions. And something that I'm wondering is, we haven't even fully gotten to the bottom of the Kennedy assassination. And so, I'm wondering what makes you think that in the future, a case such as Jeffrey Epstein and his connections will fully be solved.
Well, I'm not sure that it will. My point is that it's important that we keep looking. We cannot pretend that what we know solves the case. It just doesn't. We haven't seen the FBI notes. There hasn't been any investigation of the suspicious activity reports. There are millions of documents that were not released. So there are innumerable ways in which you look at what's been done and you can see that it's not adequate and it's not sufficient. And that is why the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and his collaborators are still upset and still urging more effort.
And like you said, there are many media outlets that can continue to investigate, and it also kind of falls on the public to do so as well. Are there any specific things that either the public or media outlets should be looking at in regards to this investigation? Is there anything the public can do outside of the realm of the DOJ?
I think this is speaking very generally, but I think it's important that when people look at this and decide what angles they want to pursue, they understand that triangular nature of the question here. It's not just Trump-Russia and then Trump-Epstein. It is Trump-Russia-Epstein. And I think if people keep that framework in mind, then their investigative efforts will be more productive. I've been a prosecutor. I've run prosecutor offices. And it's very important when you're doing an investigation, particularly a complicated one, that you have an investigative framework that matches the conduct that you're investigating. You can't just ignore aspects of it because they're not convenient. So I think if we continue to focus on Trump, Russia, Epstein as the problem, as the problem set, that we'll find good results from that.
There are many that believe that Trump has acquired, some would call it a totalitarian-esque amount of power in this country. And, the Epstein case aside, I'm wondering, would someone like Donald Trump ever admit to a connection with Russia? And would the people around him ever admit to seeing or hearing anything or even being involved?
I think you would have to really prove that point very strongly for him to feel any obligation to confess that he has that relationship. As you know, he has said all along that Trump-Russia is a hoax. We know that that's not true because the Mueller report and the bipartisan Senate intelligence report show extensive Russian activity to get him elected president. So there's that that is out there. And then you've got this interesting slip of the tongue that he made when he was asked about the Epstein investigation and his relationship with Epstein. His response was, Russia, Russia, Russia. This is the Trump-Russia hoax. So nobody had asked him about Russia. He was asked about Epstein. And yet his mind took him to Russia. So I think there are lots of reasons to believe that there is something there. Probably the most obvious of which is that this is a man who in every public relationship that we see insists on seeming to be the dominant actor and to domineer the other people he's has in the relationship with. There's one exception to that rule. With Putin, Trump is the submissive. Why is that? That is a question nobody has answered yet, but it's clearly an important question because it drives so many of the country's decisions.
Senator, that brings me to a question I have for you. I'm wondering, and many people across the country are wondering, when are we ever going to see any kind of prosecution relating to the Epstein case? In your mind?
Well, we did see the Maxwell prosecution. She's in prison. We did see the beginnings of the Epstein prosecutions. There was the one where he kind of got a hand slap and let go. And then there's the other one for the arrest of which he was in the prison where he ended up hanged. So it's not that nothing has happened. It's that there's reason to believe that the investigation is far from complete. And what you'd like to believe is that the Department of Justice as an institution would do the necessary work to make sure that the public has confidence that the investigation is in fact complete. But when the Department of Justice is led by people whose first duty is to protect Donald J. Trump as an individual and not to do their investigative work for the public, then you're going to have a problem.
It's very admirable how extensively you've spoken out about how this case has been handled. I'm unsure if you're aware, but there's going to be kind of a gathering of Epstein survivors outside the White House on April 25th, and I was wondering if you had any plans to go and address them.
I haven't.
No. And my final question for you, Senator, would be, obviously you've done your part in trying to move the needle in this investigation. But moving forward, what are you specifically going to do to further the investigation and make sure that the people that did this are held accountable?
I think the best next steps, other than continuing to call out the Trump Department of Justice for its malfeasance, the best next steps after that are, should Democrats win in November, make sure that we use the power of the gavels that we have to do proper legislative oversight of the department and to dig into what went wrong and what they were hiding.
Interesting. One more question, because that raises an interesting thought for me. Well, are you worried at all about any retaliation from the Republican Party for speaking out about this?
You know, we all live in a environment in which there's fairly significant blowback and threats. A good deal of that seems to be deliberately ginned up by the MAGA far right to provoke people who follow them on the internet, to try to provoke them to make threatening comments and to intrude into people's lives in various ways. So that kind of is the constant atmosphere that we have to do our work in this current environment. But beyond that, no, I think it's just, you do your duty and you go ahead. And frankly, if you look at the way Kristi Noem was so unceremoniously bounced with no regrets from Republicans, I think that what you're seeing from a lot of Republicans is Trump fatigue. And they don't dare admit it because he'll come after them. But when primaries are passed, and now they're having to get reelected with regular voters, and Trump is unpopular and he's misbehaving, then you might see a little bit more Republican resistance. And I think that complicates things in terms of the threats, because now they can just blame it all on Democrats. But I suspect that after primary season, as we close in on the election, with Trump cratering, there'll be much more bipartisan skepticism about Trump.
One more, because you just raised another thought for me. I'm so sorry. Kristi Noem being booted and the Republicans really not giving a second of care to it.
Yeah.
What does that tell you about Trump's leadership?
Kristi Noem being booted and the Republican response being somewhere between cheering, muted cheering, and silence shows that they're fairly fed up with things that are happening in the Trump administration. Not enough to really call it out hard, although I would say that Senator Kennedy and Senator Tillis went at Secretary Noem pretty darn hard, and that helped speed her exit, I believe. But there's a lingering and brewing discontent among Republican members of Congress about this administration. And I think that's going to surface more and more as the election comes closer.